The stars shimmered against the black of space as Captain stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance. His hands gripped the railing as he watched the enemy fleet appear on the one ship, then 10, then hundreds, then thousands. The Empire had arrived at Earth's doorstep, and they brought enough firepower to crack a planet in half. "Captain, we're counting 10,000 enemy vessels," said Lieutenant Sara from her station. Her voice stayed calm, but could hear the slight tremor underneath. "They're holding position at the edge of the solar system." Nodded slowly. 10,000 warships. Earth's entire defense force numbered barely 2,000 vessels, and most of those were outdated patrol craft and cargo haulers with guns strapped on. The Defiance was humanity's pride and joy, their most advanced warship, equipped with experimental shields and weapons that had never been tested in real combat. Against 10,000 alien warships, it felt like bringing a knife to a gunfight. "Get me Admiral Park," said. The flickered. Admiral Park appeared, her gray hair pulled back tight, her face carved from stone. Behind her could see the organized chaos of Earth Defense Command. Officers shouted orders. Holographic displays showed the fleet from every angle. Red warning lights bathed everything in blood. "Captain," said, "I assume you're seeing what we're seeing." "Yes, Admiral, they're not moving, they're just waiting." "They've done this before." His jaw tightened. 847 times, according to our intelligence. They show up. They make their demands. The target species surrenders or dies. Before could respond, every screen in the solar system went white. Every computer, every phone, every display on Earth, on Mars, on the mining stations in the asteroid belt. All of them showed the same thing. A single word. "Kneel." The word appeared in every human language at once. English, Spanish, Mandarin, Korean, Arabic, every dialect and variation. As if the aliens had reached into humanity's collective mind and pulled out the one word that would make their intentions perfectly clear. Below the word, holographic images began to play. Alien cities burning. Strange creatures with too many limbs bowing before tall, armored figures. Planets stripped bare of resources, their surfaces and dead. Species after species, conquered and broken. "Dr. Lee, what are we looking at?" His voice came through the comm. Dr. Lee, humanity's leading expert on alien languages, appeared in a small window on the screen. She looked pale. "It's a standard ultimatum, Admiral. They've used this same message for 2 centuries. The Empire conquers worlds. They don't negotiate. They don't compromise. You kneel or they erase you from existence." "How long do we have?" "They're giving us 72 hours. After that," trailed off, but everyone knew how that sentence ended. Watched the images playing across his. He saw the fear on the faces of those conquered aliens. He saw their cities in ruins. He saw children in chains. Something hot and angry coiled in his chest. "They think we're going to roll over," he said quietly. "Heard him? Most species do, Captain. They have perfected this. They show up with overwhelming force. They show you what happened to everyone else who resisted. They give you just enough time to realize you can't win. And then you surrender because at least some of your people will survive. And if we don't surrender, then they demonstrate." His eyes were hard. "They pick a city, usually the most populated one, and they turn it into glass." Thought about Seoul, about New York, about Mumbai and in Lagos. He thought about the 3 billion people on Earth who were watching that word flash on their screens right now. Kneel. "What are the politicians saying?" he asked. The usual. Disgust was clear. The European Union wants to negotiate. The Pan-Asian Coalition is calling for immediate surrender. The African Federation is demanding we fight. Everyone's shouting and nobody's doing anything useful. "And you, Admiral, what do you want to do?" Was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned forward. 60 years ago, I was born in a free world, Captain. My parents were born free. Their parents were born free. I'll be damned if I'm going to kneel to anyone." Felt a smile tug at his lips. I was hoping you'd say that. But hope isn't enough, continued. We need a plan, we need every advantage we can get, and we need to buy time. Over the next 3 hours, watched Earth's government scramble. President appeared on every channel, promising that they would explore all options, which was politicians speak for, we're terrified and don't know what to do. But while the politicians talked, the military moved. Lieutenant Sora brought up a classified file on his private screen. Captain, Admiral Park sent this. It's called Operation Prometheus. Read quickly. His eyes widened. This is insane. It's contingency planning, Sora said. We've been preparing for hostile first contact for 30 years. We just never thought it would actually happen. The plan was brilliant and desperate in equal measure. Hidden weapons platforms scattered throughout the solar system. Experimental weapons that might work or might blow up in their faces. Communication networks the aliens couldn't detect. And a defense strategy that relied on one key factor. They didn't know what humanity was really capable of, because humanity had never fought a space war before. They'll see us as primitives, muttered as he read. They'll underestimate us. That's the hope, Sora said. We get one chance to surprise them. After that, they'll know what we can do. Looked at his crew. Young men and women who had signed up to explore the stars, not to die fighting aliens. But every single one of them stood at their stations, ready to do whatever needed to be done. Lieutenant Sora, send a message to all our ships. Tell them to prepare for combat operations. Sir, we haven't heard from Earth Defense Command yet. We don't have authorization to. I don't care about authorization. His voice was sharp. Those ships out there didn't come to talk, they came to conquer, and I'm not waiting for politicians to figure that out. Sora nodded and began transmitting. On Mars, Commander read the message and smiled grimly. He'd been waiting for this. The Mars Defense Corps might be small, but they were mean, and they had surprises that would make the regret coming to this solar system. In the asteroid belt, Engineer Shin powered up her experimental weapons for the first time outside of simulations. The Hellfire torpedoes hummed with barely contained energy. Unstable, dangerous, perfect. On Luna, Admiral Song walked through the hidden fortifications built into the moon's craters. Thousands of soldiers prepared their weapons. Fighter pilots ran final checks on their craft. They all knew the odds. They all knew what was coming. And they were ready. 72 hours after the message, Admiral Park sent humanity's response. It went out on every frequency, broadcast to every corner of the solar system. They would hear it. The whole galaxy would hear it. Captain watched as appeared on screen, her uniform crisp, her eyes blazing with defiance. You sent us one message, she said, her voice steady and strong. Here's our answer. She leaned forward. Come try. The transmission ended. Across Earth's defense fleet, weapons powered up, shields activated. Humanity stopped pretending it would kneel. They had conquered 847 worlds. They were about to learn why Earth would not be the 848th. The warlord watched the human transmission with something resembling amusement. In his 300 years of service to the Empire, he had heard many brave words from species facing extinction. They all ended the same way, with submission or with silence. Come try, he repeated in his native tongue, the words clicking and hissing through his translator. Bold words for primitives. His second-in-command, a veteran named, shifted uncomfortably. Warlord, the humans destroyed 3 of our destroyers at their red planet. Perhaps we should. Should what? Turned his massive head toward. Show fear. These creatures have barely left their home system. Their weapons are crude. Their ships are slow. They got lucky at Mars, nothing more. But was right to be concerned. The attack on Mars had been unexpected. When 10 destroyers had approached the red planet to demonstrate power, the humans had fought back. Magnetic cannons hidden in the planet's surface had opened fire. 3 destroyers had been destroyed in the first volley. The remaining 7 had retreated in disorder. It was embarrassing. It was also the first time in 2 centuries that anyone had drawn blood. On Mars, Commander stood in the command center deep beneath Olympus Mons. Around him, engineers and soldiers celebrated their victory. They had bloodied they had shown that humanity could fight back. But wasn't celebrating. He stared at the tactical display showing the fleet, 10,000 ships. They had destroyed 3. It was like taking a cup of water from an ocean and declaring you'd won. Commander, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Defense Command, his communications officer said. Admiral Park appeared on the screen. She looked tired but fierce. Commander, congratulations on your victory. You've shown that we have teeth. Now we need to show them we have claws. What are your orders, Admiral? The enemy is moving toward Luna. They're going to try to take our moon and use it as a staging ground to attack Earth. We need to stop them there. Nodded, Mars Defense Corps stands ready. What do you need from us? Chaos, Commander, the fight in formation. They're organized, predictable. We need to be the opposite, hit them from angles they don't expect, make them afraid. After the transmission ended, looked at his people. You heard the Admiral. Get every ship we have ready to fly. We're going to Luna. Back on the Defiance, Captain studied the enemy fleet's movements. Lieutenant Sara was right. They were predictable. They moved in perfect geometric formations, every ship in its designated position. It was beautiful in a way, and it was a weakness. Lieutenant called to his navigator, "You see those formations?" Nam looked up from her station. She was young, barely 25, but she had an instinct for battle that had learned to trust. I see them, Captain. They're using a standard fleet deployment. Heavy ships in the center, fast attack craft on the flanks, support vessels in the rear. What if we don't fight standard? His eyes lit up. Then we might have a chance. Engineer Shin arrived on the bridge carrying a small metal case. She looked exhausted. She'd been working non-stop for 3 days, preparing her Hellfire torpedoes for combat. Captain, I need to be honest with you, said. These weapons are experimental. I've run simulations, but we've never tested them in real combat. They might work perfectly. They might not work at all. They might explode and take us with them. Looked at the case. What are the odds they work? 60%, maybe. And if they work, what can they do? Smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. They'll punch through shields like they're not even there. Each torpedo carries compressed zero-point energy. When it hits, it releases all that energy at once. The target ship won't just explode. It'll cease to exist. Load them up, said. The fleet reached Luna 12 hours later. Warlord expected another quick demonstration. The humans would see his ships. They would understand the futility of resistance. They would surrender. Instead, they attacked. Admiral Song commanded the Luna Defense Fleet from her flagship, the 300 human warships against 2,000 vessels. The numbers were impossible. The fight was suicide. Didn't care about numbers. All ships, this is Admiral Song. The enemy thinks we'll run. The enemy thinks we'll break. Show them what happens when you corner a human. She took a deep breath. All ships attack. The human fleet erupted from hiding spots around Luna's dark side. They came fast and close, too close for comfort, weaving through the formations like angry wasps. They tried to respond, but their rigid formations worked against them. They couldn't fire without hitting their own ships. Captain led the fighter wings. 5,000 small craft launched from Luna's hidden hangars and from the human capital ships. They swarmed the destroyers, too small and fast for the heavy weapons to track. Red Squadron hit their engines, shouted over the comm. Blue Squadron target their weapon batteries. Yellow Squadron, you're with me. Pilot flew his fighter through a gap between 2 cruisers. He was 17 years old. He'd lied about his age to join the defense force. Right now, Flying through enemy fire with his heart pounding and his hands steady on the controls, he'd never felt more alive. A fighter appeared on his tail, spun his craft, killed his engines, and let momentum carry him backward. The confused pilot shot past him, reactivated his engines, and put 3 plasma bolts into the enemy's reactor. The fighter disappeared in a ball of fire. "Confirmed kill," shouted. "That's one for Earth." On the Defiance's moment arrived. The Hellfire torpedoes were loaded. The targeting computer had locks on 3 heavy cruisers. "Captain, we're ready," said. Her hands shook slightly. "Fire," ordered. 3 torpedoes launched. They looked like ordinary missiles at first, streaking through space toward their targets. The cruisers didn't even bother to evade. Their shields could stop anything the humans threw at them. The first torpedo hit. The shield flashed once and then simply stopped. The torpedo continued through and struck the hull. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cruiser folded in on itself, as if space itself was eating the ship. In 3 seconds, a vessel the size of a city block had been compressed into a point of light and then vanished. The second and third torpedoes hit their targets. 2 more cruisers ceased to exist. The fleet faltered. For the first time in 200 years, they felt something unfamiliar. Fear. But there were still 2,000 ships, and humanity was bleeding. For every enemy vessel destroyed, Earth lost 3 ships. Brave men and women died in the cold of space, their last thoughts of home. On Luna's surface, a landing force broke through the defenses. Colonel led his soldiers in brutal close combat through the base corridors. They were bigger and stronger, but humans were meaner. They used every dirty trick they could think of. Lieutenant, still on the Defiance's bridge, suddenly sat up straight. "Captain, I'm seeing a pattern in their movements." "What kind of pattern?" "They're coordinating too perfectly. Every ship responds at exactly the same time. I think they're using quantum communication. All their ships are linked together." "Understood immediately. If we could disrupt that communication." "They'd lose coordination. They'd be confused." Opened a channel to Doctor, Earth's top quantum physicist. "Doctor, we need a quantum disruption pulse. How fast can you build one?" "I've been working on the theory for years," said, "but to actually build it, to make it powerful enough to affect 2,000 ships, Captain, I'd need weeks." "You have 3 hours." "That's impossible." "Then do the impossible. Earth is counting on you." 3 hours later, as the Battle of Luna reached its peak, Doctor activated her hastily constructed quantum disruptor. It was unstable. It might work once or it might explode. She pressed the button anyway. Across the fleet, communication died. 2,000 warships suddenly couldn't talk to each other, couldn't coordinate, couldn't organize. They were used to fighting as one perfect machine. Now they were 2,000 confused individuals. The human fleet, trained to operate independently, pressed their advantage. Captain gave simple orders. "All ships full attack. Don't give them time to recover." The tide of battle turned. Ships began to retreat, not in organized fashion but in panic. Some fled. Some stayed to fight. Some accidentally fired on their own vessels in the confusion. When Warlord finally called for a full retreat, he had lost 800 ships. 800 vessels destroyed by primitive humans who shouldn't have been able to fight back at all. As the fleet limped away from Luna, Admiral Park stood in Earth Defense Command and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They had won a battle. But everyone knew they would return, with more ships, with more weapons, with the full might of an empire that had conquered 847 worlds. Humanity had bought itself time. Now they had to figure out how to survive what came next. Across the galaxy, something impossible was happening. News of humanity's victory at Luna spread through underground channels, whispered between slaves, passed between conquered peoples who had long ago forgotten what freedom looked like. On the mining world of 4, a slave named paused in his work. His translator device had picked up an illegal transmission. Humans, a species he'd never heard of, fighting and winning. It couldn't be real. Nobody fought and lived. But the transmission showed footage of ships burning, of human fighters swarming like insects, of a fleet in retreat. Looked at his fellow slaves. He saw hope in their eyes for the first time in a generation. On Earth, there was no celebration. Admiral Park stood before the United Earth Council, delivering a report that nobody wanted to hear. "We won at Luna," she said. "We destroyed 800 of their ships. It's the greatest military victory in human history." She paused. "It's also meaningless." President leaned forward. "Explain, Admiral." "The Empire has 50,000 warships. We hurt one fleet. We haven't touched their main force. And now they know we're a threat." Brought up a holographic display. "Intelligence reports that the High Command is mobilizing their primary fleet. 50,000 ships are heading toward Earth. They'll be here in 3 weeks." The council chamber fell silent. 50,000, President repeated. "We can't fight 50,000 ships." "No," agreed, "we can't." "Then what do we do?" It was Captain who answered. He'd been called to the council as a military advisor. "We fight smarter. We've been reacting to them. It's time to make them react to us." "How?" demanded Minister Park, the head of Earth's diplomatic corps. "They have the numbers. They have the technology. What do we have?" "Information," said Lieutenant Sara. She stood beside, holding a data pad. "Commander led a boarding party onto a damaged command ship. What we found changes everything." She activated a holographic display. Technical schematics appeared, showing weapons, shields, and engines. But something was wrong with them. The designs were inconsistent. Different systems used different technologies that didn't match. "They don't invent their own technology," Sara explained. "They steal it. Their shields came from a species called who wiped out 60 years ago. Their weapons came from the civilization, extinct for a century. Their faster-than-light engines came from who are now slaves in mines. They're parasites," said. "They take the best technology from every species they conquer. That's how they built their empire, not through innovation but through theft." President saw where this was going, which means there are other species out there who hate the just as much as we do, finished. Species who remember when they were free, species who might help us if we can reach them. "How?" Minister Park asked. "We can't even leave our own solar system. We don't have faster-than-light travel." Commander stepped forward. He was a quiet man, head of Earth's Black Operations Division. When he spoke, people listened. "We captured communication equipment. We've been studying their networks. We can send messages across the galaxy. We just need to know what to say." "Tell them humanity is fighting," said. "Tell them we refuse to kneel. Tell them it's possible to resist." "And hope they listen." Minister Park shook his head. "That's a desperate plan." "We're desperate," said flatly. "In 3 weeks, 50,000 warships will arrive. If we're going to die, we might as well die trying to light a fire that spreads across the galaxy." The council voted. The decision was unanimous. Earth would broadcast a message to every conquered world in the Empire. Commander volunteered to deliver the message. He stood in front of the camera, still wearing his battered uniform from the Battle of Mars. Behind him, the red planet glowed in the "My name is Commander of the United Earth Defense Force," he began. "3 weeks ago, the Empire came to our world. They told us to kneel. We said no." He gestured to the behind him. "We fought them at Mars. We fought them at Luna. We lost friends. We lost loved ones, but we didn't lose our freedom. And we won't." His voice grew stronger. "I know many of you watching this have already lost your freedom. They took your worlds, your people, your future. But I want you to know something important. It's not over. Humanity is fighting. We're small. We're outnumbered. We're probably going to lose." He leaned toward the camera. "But we're going to make them regret ever coming here. And if we can do it, so can you. Don't give up. Don't stop resisting. The Empire looks strong, but it's built on theft and fear can be broken. The message was sent to every corner of the Empire, broadcast on every frequency humanity could access. For a long moment, there was silence. Then from a small moon on the edge of space, a response came. "We remember freedom." That was all it said. Then another response, and another. Across 100 worlds, conquered peoples sent back messages of hope and defiance. On 4 and his fellow slaves made a decision. They couldn't help Earth directly. They were too far away, too weak, too oppressed. But they could cause problems. They could sabotage mining equipment. They could slow down ore shipments. They could make the life just a little bit harder. It wasn't much, but it was something. On Earth, engineer Shin worked around the clock on a new project. The Hellfire torpedoes had worked, but they were too slow to produce. She needed something bigger, something that could hit multiple targets at once. She called it the Cascade System, a network of weapons platforms scattered throughout the solar system, all linked through quantum communication. When one platform fired, they all fired, thousands of weapons acting as one. "It's never been tested," she told Captain. "The quantum links might fail, the targeting might be off, the whole system could crash." "Will it work?" asked. "I think so, maybe, 60% chance." Laughed. It was a tired, slightly crazy sound. "That's the best odds we've gotten all week. Build it." Doctor and her partner, Dr. Jinnah Park, worked on an even crazier project. They were trying to weaponize gravity itself. Create a localized gravity well that would trap the fleet, prevent them from escaping or maneuvering. "If this works," Jinnah said, staring at the equations on her screen, "it'll be the greatest achievement in human history." "And if it doesn't work?" her assistant asked. "Then we'll be dead, so it won't matter." On Luna, Admiral Song oversaw repairs to the damaged defense stations. The Battle of Luna had left the moon. Craters within craters. Bases that had stood for 50 years now reduced to rubble. But the human spirit hadn't broken. Soldiers worked through exhaustion to rebuild. Engineers fixed ships that should have been scrapped. Pilots trained for a battle they probably wouldn't survive. Pilot, the 17-year-old ace, had shot down 15 enemy fighters. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he sat in his barracks and wrote letters to his family on Earth. Letters that would only be delivered if he didn't come back. "You scared?" his wingman asked. "Terrified," admitted. "You?" "Every second. But I'd rather be scared and fighting than scared and kneeling." Lieutenant continued studying tactics. She discovered their weakness once. She was determined to find more. She barely slept, barely ate. Captain had to order her to take breaks. "I'm fine, Captain," she protested. "You're exhausted," said, "and I need you sharp, not dead on your feet. Rest, that's an order." Finally nodded and headed to her quarters, but her mind kept working. There had to be another weakness, another crack in the armor. She just had to find it. Colonel trained his soldiers for ground combat. If they landed on Earth, the fighting would be brutal and close, hand to hand, no mercy. "They're bigger than us," told his troops. "They're stronger than us, they have better armor and better weapons." He smiled grimly. "But they've been winning so long they've forgotten how to fight dirty. We haven't." He taught them every trick he knew, how to use the terrain, how to set traps, how to turn enemy strengths into weaknesses, how to make every casualty count. As the days passed, Earth prepared, not for victory but for the kind of fight that would be remembered, the kind of last stand that would inspire others. 3 weeks after the Battle of Luna, long-range sensors picked up the main fleet. 50,000 warships, moving in perfect formation. They were coming fast and they weren't hiding. Admiral Park stood in the command center, watching the sensors. Around her, every officer prepared for the battle that would decide humanity's future. "Admiral," Captain said over the comm, "the Defiance is ready. The fleet is ready. We're all ready. I know, Captain, said softly. Then louder, addressing everyone in the command center and every ship in the defense fleet. The enemy thinks they've already won. They think we're going to break, going to run, going to beg for mercy. She paused, letting her words sink in. Show them what happens when they threaten Earth. Show them what humanity means. Show them why we'll never kneel. Across the solar system, 2,000 human warships powered up their weapons. It wasn't enough. Everyone knew it wasn't enough. But they were going to try anyway. The Supreme Commander watched Earth grow larger on his, 50,000 warships at his command, the largest fleet ever assembled in history. This time there would be no mistakes, no surprises, no mercy. Supreme Commander, his tactical officer reported, we're detecting the human defense fleet. They're holding position around the third planet. How many ships? 2,000, sir, maybe less. Allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. 2,000 against 50,000. The humans had courage, he'd give them that, but courage didn't win wars. Numbers did, technology did, power did. Begin the assault, he ordered. On Earth, in the deep bunkers beneath Geneva, President met with her closest advisors. The mood was dark. Outside, people celebrated one last day of freedom. They filled the streets. They held their loved ones. They looked up at the stars and wondered if they'd see tomorrow's sunrise. We need to discuss our options, President said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. Dr. Jenna Park spoke first. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. We have one weapon left. Project. We can turn the sun into a weapon. Create a solar flare big enough to destroy the fleet. And what would that do to Earth? Admiral asked, though she already knew the answer. It would damage the inner solar system severely. Jenna couldn't meet their eyes. Earth, Mars, Venus, the heat would be extreme. Most people wouldn't survive. Most people, Minister Park's voice rose. You mean billions would die? Billions would die if the win, Jenna said quietly. At least this way we'd die free. The room fell silent. There has to be another way, President said. We didn't come this far just to kill ourselves. Admiral pulled up a different plan. Operation Exodus. We evacuate as many people as we can on our fastest ships. Then we collapse the solar system's relay points, trap the here in a dead-end system. They'd win Earth, but they couldn't leave to threaten anyone else. How many could we evacuate? President asked. Maybe 1 million if we're lucky. Jaw tightened. Out of 8 billion people. President closed her eyes. 1 million saved. 7 billion dead or enslaved. It was an impossible choice. There's a third option, Captain said. He'd been quiet until now, sitting in the corner of the room. We fight smarter. Captain, we've been over this, Minister Park said. We can't win. The numbers don't work. Then we change the numbers, stood and approached the holographic display. We've been thinking about this wrong. We've been trying to beat 50,000 ships. We can't, but we don't have to. He manipulated the display, showing the fleet formation. They're arrogant. They think they've already won. They're coming in one massive formation all together. What if we use that against them? Lieutenant entered the room carrying a data pad. She'd been analyzing battle patterns for 3 weeks straight. Captain is right. I've found something. The fleet uses a quantum coordination network. All 50,000 ships are linked together. It makes them efficient, but it also makes them vulnerable. We disrupted their network before at Luna, Admiral said. But that was 2,000 ships, 50,000. The scale is different. I know, said, which is why we don't disrupt it, we hijack it. Everyone stared at her. Hijack it, President repeated. Commander's team has been studying the captured communication systems. We think we can inject code into their network. Not just disrupt it, but take control of it. For maybe 30 seconds, we could give orders to their entire fleet. 30 seconds, Minister Park scoffed. What could we do in 30 seconds? Smiled everything. The plan was insane. It relied on technology they barely understood. It required perfect timing. It needed luck and skill in equal measure. And if it failed, they'd have no backup plan. "Let's do it," President said. Over the next 6 hours, Earth's best programmers worked with Commander to build the intrusion code. Doctor and Dr. Jinnah prepared their gravity well weapon. Engineer activated the Cascade weapon system, linking every human weapon platform in the solar system. On the Defiance, Captain briefed his crew. "We're going to fly straight at them, right into the center of their fleet. Everyone else will think we're crazy or suicidal. We need to get close enough to inject our code directly into their flagship." "That's suicide, Captain," Lieutenant Sora said. "Probably," agreed. "Anyone who wants to transfer off, now's the time. I won't hold it against you." Nobody moved. "All right then," said, "let's go make history." The battle began as the fleet entered Earth's orbit. Supreme Commander expected the humans to try something desperate. Long-range attacks, maybe. Suicide runs. The usual tactics of a species facing extinction. He didn't expect them to attack immediately and aggressively. Admiral Song led the Luna Defense Fleet in a frontal assault. 300 ships charging straight at 50,000. It looked like madness. It was meant to look like madness. "All ships full attack," ordered. "Make them focus on us." The fleet's attention locked on's fleet. Their weapons powered up. Their targeting systems tracked the human ships, which meant they weren't watching the Defiance slip through their formation's edge, painted black against the stars, running silent and fast. Captain held his breath as they flew between two dreadnoughts. Either one could destroy the Defiance with a single shot, but they were focused forward on the main attack. "Almost there," whispered. On Mars, Commander launched every fighter they had. Thousands of small craft swarmed from the red planet, heading straight for the fleet's rear. They wouldn't do much damage, but they'd divide the enemy's attention even further. Pilot flew with the Mars wing. His hands were steady on the controls. His heart hammered in his chest. This was it. The final battle. Win or lose, this was where everything would be decided. "Red Squadron, follow me," he called, and dove into the enemy formation. The Defiance reached the flagship. It was massive, 10 times the size of any human ship. Its shields glowed bright enough to light up the darkness of space. "Lieutenant Sora now," ordered. Sora launched a single Hellfire torpedo, not at the flagship, but at a smaller escort vessel nearby. The torpedo hit, and the escort ship ceased to exist in a flash of zero-point energy. For just a moment, the flagship's shields adjusted to protect against the blast. For just a moment, there was a gap. Commander fired a data spike directly into the flagship's hull. The spike burrowed through armor and found the ship's main computer core. It began uploading Lieutenant's intrusion code. "How long?" asked. 20 seconds, said, "if it works." 20 seconds felt like 20 years. The flagship's defenses activated. They detected the intrusion. Alarms blared. Security systems engaged. But they were too late. The code finished uploading. For exactly 30 seconds, every ship in the fleet responded to commands from the Defiance instead of from. "Do it," shouted. Lieutenant sent the command. All 50,000 ships stopped moving. Their engines shut down. Their weapons powered down. Their shields dropped. For 30 seconds, the most powerful fleet in the galaxy was completely helpless. "Cascade system fire," Engineer commanded. Every weapon platform in the solar system fired at once. Thousands of missiles, torpedoes, and energy weapons launched simultaneously. They'd been pre-aimed at specific targets throughout the fleet. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. In 5 seconds, 3,000 ships simply ceased to exist. "Gravity well activate," Doctor shouted from Earth. The experimental weapon powered up. Space itself bent around the fleet. A localized gravity well formed, trapping them in Earth's orbit. They couldn't escape. They couldn't maneuver. The 30 seconds ended. Control of the fleet returned too. But the damage was done. 3,000 ships gone, the fleet trapped, their perfect formation destroyed, and for the first time in history, a supreme commander felt something he'd never experienced before. Pure, absolute terror. All ships counterattack, screamed, but his fleet was in chaos. Ships collided with each other. Commanders shouted conflicting orders. The perfect machine had broken down. And humanity pressed the advantage. All human forces full attack, Admiral ordered. Don't let them recover. 2,000 human ships against 47,000. The numbers were still impossible. But the humans weren't fighting alone anymore. From across the galaxy, the conquered species who'd heard Earth's message began to act. On 4, and his fellow slaves sabotaged the mining operations, delaying supply shipments. On 9, the remnants of an ancient civilization hacked into communication networks, spreading chaos. On 100 worlds, small acts of rebellion became a wave of resistance. The empire, built on fear and overwhelming force, began to crack. And in Earth's orbit, Captain looked at his crew and smiled. We're not done yet. Supreme Commander had lived for 400 years. He had conquered 60 star systems personally. He had watched thousands of species kneel before him. He had never lost a battle. Until today. His flagship shook as another human torpedo struck the shields. Around him, officers shouted reports. All bad news. The gravity well trapped them. Their formation was shattered. Ships collided with each other in the chaos. And the humans, those primitive, backward humans, were tearing his fleet apart. Sir, we've lost another 1,000 ships, his tactical officer reported. The humans are using swarm tactics. Our heavy weapons can't track them. Slammed his fist on the command console. Deploy all fighters. Every ship launches everything they have. Overwhelm them with numbers. But it was too late for that strategy. The humans had planned for numbers. Pilot led his squadron through a cloud of fighters. There were hundreds of enemy craft for every human pilot, but the humans had something that didn't. They had rage. They had fear. They had the desperate fury of people defending their home. Red Squadron split pattern, called. His squadron broke formation, each pilot flying in a different direction. The fighters, trained to fight in organized groups, didn't know how to respond. Spun his fighter, killed his engines, and let a ship overshoot him. He fired. One enemy down. He reactivated his engines and dove toward another target. His hands moved without thinking. Pure instinct. Pure skill. On the Defiance, Captain coordinated the entire human fleet. Lieutenant fed him tactical data. Lieutenant Sora managed weapons systems. Engineer kept the experimental weapons firing despite overheating and system failures. Captain, the flagship is trying to break free from the gravity well, Sora reported. They're diverting all power to their engines. All ships focus fire on the flagship, ordered. Don't let escape. Admiral Song brought the and her remaining ships around for another attack run. They'd lost half the Luna defense fleet. The survivors were battered, shields failing, weapons running low on ammunition. But they weren't done. For everyone we've lost, shouted into the fleet-wide channel. For Earth, fire everything. The combined firepower of the human fleet concentrated on its flagship. Shields flashed and held. The massive ship was built to withstand bombardments that could crack planets. Then Engineer fired her last Hellfire torpedo. The torpedo punched through the shields like they didn't exist. It struck the flagship's main reactor. For a moment, the ship held together. Then it began to fold in on itself, the zero-point energy collapsing spacetime around the reactor core. Abandoned ship, screamed. But there was no time. The flagship imploded, taking and 3,000 crew members with it. The supreme commander of the fleet died not in glorious battle, but in confusion and panic, destroyed by a species he'd thought was primitive. Without their command ship, without their leader, the fleet began to break. Some ships tried to fight. Some tried to flee. Most just drifted, their commanders unsure what to do without orders from above. Admiral Park saw the moment of victory approaching. The enemy was broken. Earth had won. But winning wasn't enough. "Open a channel," ordered, "broadcast to the entire fleet." Her face appeared on every enemy. "Warriors, your supreme commander is dead. Your fleet is defeated. You have two choices. Surrender now or die here. Choose quickly." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one ship powered down its weapons and raised a white flag, an ancient human symbol of surrender that every species seemed to understand. Then another ship, then 10, then hundreds. By the time the sun rose over Earth the next morning, 20,000 ships had surrendered. Another 15,000 had been destroyed. The remaining ships had managed to escape the gravity well and fled into deep space. The Battle of Earth was over. Humanity had won. But the war was just beginning. Commander stood in the captured flagship's communication center. The ship's computers contained something precious: access codes to the entire Empire's communication network. "Admiral Park," said over the secured channel, "I can send a message to every corner of space. What should we tell them?" Admiral smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Tell them the truth. Tell them the Empire is broken. Tell them that humans did what no one else could do. And tell every conquered species that now is the time to rise up." The message went out across the galaxy. On-4 and his fellow slaves heard the message and began a full revolt. They overwhelmed their guards. They seized the mining equipment and turned it into weapons. They fought with everything they had. On-9, the descendants of the people who'd thought their species extinct emerged from hiding and reclaimed their. On-7, freed slaves took control of the weapon factories that had armed the fleet and began building weapons for themselves. Across 100 worlds, 200 worlds, 500 worlds, the conquered peoples rose up. The empire, built over 2 centuries of conquest and fear, began to collapse. It took 6 months for the empire to completely fall apart. 6 months of rebellions and civil wars and freed peoples taking revenge on their former masters. Humanity helped where they could. Captain led relief missions to liberated worlds. Commander helped train resistance fighters. Engineer shared her weapons technology with species who needed to defend their new freedom. Earth became a symbol, not of military might but of defiance, of refusing to kneel, of showing that even the smallest, weakest species could defeat tyrants if they had courage and ingenuity. 1 year after the Battle of Earth, representatives from 200 freed species gathered on Mars for the first meeting of what would become the Coalition of Free Worlds. President stood before them. She looked older now. The war had aged her, but her eyes were bright. "We've been offered the position of leadership in this new coalition," she told them. "We've declined. Humanity isn't interested in building an empire. We've seen what empires do." Now the representative of the freed people spoke up. "Then what does humanity want?" "We want to be partners," President said. "We want to explore the galaxy together, learn from each other, help each other. We want to make sure that what happened to all of us never happens again." The coalition agreed. No single species would lead. No empire would rise. They would work together as equals. On Luna, Admiral Song oversaw the construction of the Coalition Defense Force. Ships from 100 species worked together, training to defend each other. It wasn't always easy. Different species had different ways of fighting, different cultures, different values. But they learned. On the rebuilt Defiance, Captain patrolled the edges of Coalition space. His crew was mixed now. Humans. They worked together, watched each other's backs, became family. Lieutenant had been promoted to commander. She ran the Coalition's Tactical Analysis Center, making sure they could identify and stop any future threats before they became dangerous. Engineer and doctor led the Coalition Science Council, sharing technology freely among all member species. The opposite of the way. Instead of stealing knowledge, they gave it away. Pilot, now 19 years old and an instructor, taught young pilots from a dozen species. He told them about the Battle of Earth, about fear and courage, about fighting for something bigger than yourself. Why did humanity fight? A young pilot asked him. You could have run, you could have surrendered. Why risk everything? Thought about that. He remembered being 17 and terrified and flying into battle knowing he'd probably die. Because some things are worth more than survival, he said finally. Freedom, dignity, the right to stand up and say no when someone tries to make you kneel. That's worth fighting for. That's worth dying for. In the ruins of what had been a memorial was built, not to celebrate victory, but to mourn the dead on all sides. Millions had died in the war and the rebellions that followed. They'd been soldiers following orders, people trapped in an evil system. The memorial's inscription was written in every language of the coalition. May we remember the cost of tyranny. May we never forget the price of freedom. May we always stand together against oppression. Commander retired from military service and became a teacher. He trained the next generation in tactics and strategy, but more importantly, he taught them ethics. How to fight without becoming what you fought against. How to win without losing your humanity. Colonel trained coalition special forces. He taught them not just how to fight, but when to fight. How to protect without becoming oppressors themselves. Dr. Jenna Park and her team continued their research, but they'd learned a lesson. They never built project. Some weapons were too terrible to exist, even in defense of freedom. 5 years after the Battle of Earth, Admiral Park retired. She'd spent her entire life in military service. She was tired. The galaxy was safer now, but not safe. It never would be completely safe. On her last day in uniform, she stood on Earth and looked up at the stars. So many worlds out there now. So many species working together. So much hope. Captain came to see her off. He was an admiral himself now, though he still commanded the Defiance. We did it, said. We changed the galaxy. We started something, corrected. Future generations will have to keep it going. Freedom isn't something you win once and keep forever. It's something you have to defend every single day. Do you think they'll remember? Asked. In 100 years, in 1,000 years, will they remember what we did? Smiled. They'll remember that when someone told humanity to kneel, we said no. They'll remember that one small species faced impossible odds and won. They'll remember that we lit a fire that freed an entire galaxy. She looked up at the stars one more time. And they'll remember that the fire never went out. 10 years after the Battle of Earth, the coalition of free worlds had grown to include 500 species. The galaxy wasn't perfect. There were disputes. There were conflicts. There were pirates and criminals and small wars. But there were no empires. No species knelt to another. On Earth, in the capital city, a monument stood. It showed a simple scene, a human standing upright looking at the stars. Beneath it, an inscription. They sent one message, kneel. We sent one answer, never. And our defiance blazed across the stars, lighting the way for all who refused to bow. Children from 100 worlds visited the monument. They learned the story of humanity's war. They learned about courage and sacrifice. They learned that sometimes the smallest voice, refusing to be silenced, could change everything. And somewhere in the distant stars, Pilot, now an old man, told the story one more time to a group of young cadets. Remember, he said, you don't have to be the biggest or the strongest to make a difference. You just have to be brave enough to stand up. You just have to be willing to fight for what's right. You just have to refuse to kneel. The cadets listened, their eyes bright with hope and determination. The fire that humanity had lit still burned. and it would never go out.